Good evening all and welcome. I have a huge announcement. If any of you have been following me for the last 4 or 5 years, you'll know that when I started off this channel, I collaborated with a guy called Shivers, who started roughly at the same time as me, and eventually he had to stop, but now he's back. He's got a fantastic voice, and I know you're absolutely going to love him. So give him a chance, give him a listen, and I hope you enjoy our collaboration. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Lock your doors and windows, and let the darkness take control. My husband works a rotating schedule, so sometimes he works night shift, another time he works days. 2 days ago he started his night shift rotation. I always feel uneasy at home when he's not here, even though we live in the country and it's supposed to be safer. Around 9:30 Friday night, I was doing my dishes. My daughter was watching TV and my dogs were sleeping. I had just turned the sink off and I heard our screen door open. It makes a swoosh kind of noise when it opens and closes. We have a little entryway between the screen door and the main door. A few seconds after I heard the screen door, I saw the main door handle turn all the way down. It had an electronic keyboard lock, so the handle turns even when it's locked. I feel so lucky that I remembered to lock it. Immediately the dogs started acting weird. They're running to the windows trying to look out and they're growling and barking. As much as I didn't want to, I looked out the window and saw nothing. No person, no car, not a damn thing. I picked up my daughter and took her to the bedroom and called 911. It only took a few minutes for the cops to get there, because I guess they were all just in the area. I told them what happened, and they looked around and briefly told me the winds opened the screen door and no one was out there. Whatever. I live in the woods. The person was probably standing 100 feet away, watching them doing their half-assed search. I haven't felt safe in the house since. I've even started locking the screen door. It's not like the house looked empty. All the lights were on and the TV was playing a show. I can't even describe the deep fear I felt when I saw the door handle turn. I'm glad the dogs are very vocal and scary sounding. It definitely deterred the person from trying harder to get in.
My father, Pat, grew up in a tall grass country in Butler County, Kansas, on a 5-acre truck farm about 3 miles outside the town of El Dorado. He was born in a sharecropper's house at exactly 8 a.m. on March 10, 1931. It had snowed so much that the doctor wasn't able to get his car out to deliver the baby. And so, my grandfather called the town vet and asked him to come because he had a sleigh and therefore could get through to the house. My grandmother never forgave him for that. My grandfather, my father's father Lester, was finally able to buy some land when Pat was about 5 years old, so he bought acres directly across the road from the sharecropper's house Pat was born in. And there, he built a stone house for his growing family, and he and my grandmother turned the land into a truck farm. It was during the Great Depression, so times were tough, and my grandmother Audrey took care of a lot of people with the food they grew and the animals they had. She never turned anyone away, and Pat never forgot what he learned from Audrey, and because of that, and who he was, took care of those in need all his life. Even when he was desperately poor himself, he always managed to find a surplus to take care of others. My father was an exceptionally intelligent and adventurous person, and was a fantastical, wonderful storyteller. He was the best storyteller I've ever heard, and many, many folks I knew would agree with that, hands down. I have a plethora of his stories I plan to tell, and this is one of them. As a child, Pat roamed the prairie, woods, and creeks for miles around the farm when he wasn't busy with his chores. He was a curious and inventive child who was happy playing by himself as he was with his friends. He loved to make jewelry out of things that he found in nature to give to his mother. This became a lifetime fascination. As he grew into an adult, he used what he could find to make incredible sculptures and jewelry. He was a fabulous artist, and I am blessed to have a small collection of his sculptures and jewelry. Of course, living on a farm, as all children that do, he had jobs to perform each day. One of those chores he and his older brother Gene had was to milk the cows. They had to be milked twice a day. Since Pat did not like to get up early, and Gene did, Pat milked the cows in the evening. To get to the barn, you had to go through the chicken yard, which had 2 gates on either side. You had to open the latch and unlatch the gates as you passed through, so the chickens wouldn't escape. One night, when Pat was about 10 years old, during the late fall when it was very cold and got dark early, he prepared, as he always did, to go out and milk the cows. He bundled up in his jacket and put on his boots and lit the lantern so he could make his way. He went out the back door, walked down the stairs, and slowly crossed the backyard, taking his time as children do when they're shouldered with a chore. He got to the chicken yard and unlatched the first gate, and after passing through, latched it again. He was ambling along, daydreaming, looking down just in front of him, since the lantern didn't fall more than a couple feet in front of him. The chicken yard was kind of large, so it took him a minute or two to cross and get to the second gate. He passed through, made sure the gate was latched as well, and slowly headed towards the barn door. He wasn't looking forward to milking the cows in the dark and cold. As he came up to the barn door, an eerie feeling suddenly came over him, though he knew not why. As he took his next step, there, in a pool of light right in front of him, were a pair of gnarled, old bare feet. He slowly looked up, his mind barely able to comprehend what his eyes just beheld. For there was a bent and twisted thing, seemingly covered in rags. As his eyes continued upward, there atop of the shoulders sat a face from the depths of hell. The eyes were wild and red, the hair long, gray, and wiry, sticking out in every direction. The lips were pulled back tightly in a terrible snarl over yellowed and broken teeth. This thing, for which he wasn't entirely sure what it was, made a strangled, choking cry and reached out towards Pat with a gnarled, clawed hand. At that moment, a great surge of adrenaline numbed his thoughts of all but flight. Shaking with fear that he'd never known before, he dropped the lantern, turned on his heel, and began to run for his very life, all while screaming hysterically for his father to come save him. His voice was now so high in his throat it seemed to strangle him. He reached for the first gate and somehow he got the latch undone and was through, flying on wings of fear as fast as his feet could carry him. As he ran across the chicken yard, he could hear the creature right at his heels making the strangest, most horrible sounds that he'd ever heard. The noises were not human. They sounded like the demon Pat was sure this was. He made it to the second gate, managing to unlatch it just as he felt claws grab at his shoulder, catching at his coat. He managed to pull free, still screaming for his father to come help and save him. At that very moment, when he was sure that he was about to be caught and done unto, his father appeared on the back porch, shotgun in hand. He rapidly cocked the gun while threatening to shoot. But the creature had already disappeared into the dark. Lester assured Pat that he was now safe while steering him up on the back porch stairs and into the kitchen, where his mother could comfort him. Then Lester set out to find the intruder and spent the next hour patrolling their property, looking for the old demon man. But nothing and no one was to be found. Several days later, Lester came home with his poor tale. There was an insane asylum some 6 miles or so outside of El Dorado, and one of the inmates had escaped and wandered off that very night of Pat's near mishap. He had been picked up the very next day, about another 10 miles away. What a poor old fool. However, many months afterward, Pat was terrified of going to the barn alone after dark, and would beg his brother Gene to go with him, which he never would. Needless to say, from then on, he did his best to milk the cows before dark, though in winter, that could be difficult.
When I was in college out of state, I stayed up at a college over the summer subletting for a friend with some friends. Good times. I was working a late afternoon shift, so I was home at around 2 p.m. during the day and living with a bunch of college friends people. I think I was watching something at the time, but I started hearing some banging and figured a housemate came home at a really odd time and didn't think much of it. As the banging got progressively louder, I decided maybe they were locked in or something and didn't have their own phone because it was getting really loud. Turns out there was a guy actively breaking into my house through the back door. Threw out some shoes, grabbed my phone with my earbuds so that I could call the police hands-free, and chilled by the other door so I could bolt. The guy finally made it in and saw me, and I was actively talking with the dispatcher and bolted. I gave a description, had some sirens, gave a statement, and landlord essentially nailed the back door shut until they could fix the frame and install a new deadbolt.
I grew up in a very small town in Central California. My mom and I moved houses quite often. So, when I was 6 years old, me and my mother moved into a trailer park, not long after my grandmother moved in next door. To give you a scene of the trailer park, I would describe it as having 5 columns with 3 trailers in each column. I started going over to my grandmother's house every weekend to watch the WWE that I recorded throughout the week. When I would watch WWE, I would stay up until 3 or 4 in the morning. Everything was going good the first couple of years when I was about 6. When I turned 8, I started feeling a weird sensation at nighttime. Occasionally, I would hear someone or something walking around my grandma's trailer. One day, I was sitting on the floor eating some potato chips and drinking some soda while watching WWE. When out of nowhere, I started feeling this sensation that I was being watched. I thought to myself, I need to be brave, it's probably nothing. But when I decided to look to my left, I seen a silhouette of a man looking in the bottom window at me. My grandma's windows were kind of weird. There was a main window where windows normally are, but below was another small window on the floor level. I looked through the window on the floor level, and that's where I saw the face. I flipped out and went to my grandma's room and told her, but she didn't believe me. The next weekend, I went over and was watching WWE again, and everything was going okay until I turned off the TV. I heard a bag of recyclables being thrown across the backyard. I freaked out and went to my grandma, but again, she didn't believe me. The last encounter I had with this thing, or person, was when I went over to my friend's house. He kicked me out because we had an argument, so I decided to walk to my grandma's. When I got there, it was about 12 o'clock at night, and I walked up to the front door and it was cracked open. I was really worried about my grandma, so I started searching around the house, and no one was there besides my sleeping grandma. So I did my normal routine, and turned on the TV, watched WWE, but this time, I had a weird feeling in my gut. I decided to turn off the TV before the show ended, and I still felt weird, so I went into the backyard and decided to look around. When I got to the driveway, I saw that my grandmother's van's trunk was open. I slowly backed away and went back into the house and locked all the doors. I told my grandma that I thought someone broke into her van. So, we called the cops, and they said they've been getting calls about someone walking around the trailer park, but every time they asked what he looked like, everyone just said it was a dark face in a black suit. There was another experience I had in the trailer. Me and my cousins were hanging out in the living room, and no one else was home. When out of nowhere, the sink and toilet in the bathroom flushed and turned on at the same time, but we just figured that it was plumbing issues. I also don't know why they never messed with me at my mother's house, since it was right next door. That night left so many questions in my mind, and to this day, I don't know what or who it was, but that really freaked me out.
This happened my senior year of college. I lived off campus with 2 roommates in a townhouse called Natalie and Katie. Katie was out that night doing homework in one of the school buildings, and I was awoken at 3 a.m. when I heard some knocking on the door downstairs. I thought that was weird considering the hour, but I figured someone had the wrong place and would realize and leave. The knocking didn't stop though, and I lied in bed for a good several minutes thinking, yeah, they'll go away now. They'll go away when they get bored. As one might expect though, I started to grow confused, and then kind of freaked out by this person's persistence. The knocking turned into banging, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Honestly, I should have probably called the police that instant, but it was the middle of the night, and I was just confused. So I headed to the top of the stairs to see Natalie standing near the door staring at it. Her room was on the bottom floor, and she had just walked up to it. We exchanged a baffled look, because what the hell, it's 3 a.m. This is weird. Natalie called out, and she asked them who they were and what they wanted. We're Katie's friends, said the voice on the other end, who sounded male and about our age. We know her boyfriend, and we've heard she was feeling down, so we came to surprise her. That was a really weird story, but thankfully Katie wasn't even home, so we both informed them of this. Katie's not here, she's off doing something else. Good, they're gonna leave, right? They came here to see Katie, she's not here, they're gonna leave, and we want to go back to sleep. Just open the door, I know. If I hadn't called the police before, I definitely should have done it now. It was weird though. That night I realized why people do stupid things in horror films. Not only had I been woken up out of nowhere, but it feels surreal to be in a situation like this. Like there's no way you could actually be in any danger. That only happens in horror movies and true crime documentaries, and in questionable creepy online stories. It could never happen to me. I'm just a random, ordinary, boring person going about my business. I don't need to call the police. I'm sure everything will work out, be cleared up, and everything will be fine. So yeah, Natalie and I did the stupidest thing and tried to argue with them. We told them that again, Katie wasn't there, and that there was no need for them to stay. Eventually, Natalie asked what their names were. Throughout the encounter, we made out two very distinct voices, but only one gave us a name. And I texted Katie, asking her if she was friends with someone of that name. After a few minutes, during which we were still arguing with the stranger, Katie replied, "I am, but I don't think she knows where I live." That wasn't good. But even worse, she? The person on the other door had a male voice, so this was a real name, but not the real person. Whoever this was knew stuff about Katie, like who she hung out with. I told Katie to stay where she was and to not come back until we told her everything was okay. Finally, we told the guys that if they didn't leave, we were going to call the police. No, don't call the police. Okay, if we wanted to do something bad, we would have done it already, right? Yeah, that's the last bit that wasn't helping their case. Just open the door, okay? The attempts at reasoning with them over the balcony devolved into them telling us to just open the door over and over again, until we finally actually did call the cops, and we hid in Natalie's room and dialed 911, and explained what was going on. Thankfully, there was a police station nearby, so it wouldn't take them long to arrive. Unfortunately, I had made the mistake of heading back into the living room and yelling through the door that we'd called the cops, but contrary to what you might think, that actually didn't seem to scare them at all. They seemed only mildly upset and kept arguing. To this day, I can only assume they didn't believe us. Then, we heard a neighbor's home door swing open, and a very pissed off man start saying, "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops." For whatever reason, that was what made them freak out and leave. The police did arrive and we told them the whole story. Natalie revealed that a couple of times she had barely peeked through the blinds of the window close to the front door, and she noticed that there were two guys, but only one of them was ever at the door at a given time, and they would switch, one by one, sitting in the driver's seat of a parked car out front, presumably for getaway purposes. So that's reassuring. They also hadn't looked drunk, according to Natalie, and they definitely hadn't sounded as if they were. There wasn't much the police could do besides sweep the area a bit, but they told us that if the strangers showed up again, to immediately call instead of engaging with them. One of the officers did give us some self-defense tactics and told us what kind of household items and chemicals would be best for self-defense. After making sure everything was okay and reassuring us, they left, and we eventually called Katie and told her the weirdos were gone. She arrived and was understandably shaken. We sat down and asked her who it might have been. She did know people who had come to the apartment, so someone, certainly, but Natalie hadn't recognized the guys outside as any previous visitors. Worse, it turned out that not only did they know Katie's friend's name, but they also claimed to know her boyfriend, even though he didn't live in the same state where they were going to school. She swore up and down that she didn't know anyone who would do that to hurt her. But by the point it was around 5 AM, so I didn't even bother going to sleep, since I was going to a workshop that morning, and I told a lot of my classmates the story. It freaked them out too. And the entire day Natalie and I jumped at every unexpected noise, every shadow, every random movement. That night it was hard to sleep. I expected to hear knocking. Thankfully they never came back, ever. But that almost makes the thing more unsettling. I'll never know what they wanted that night. Did they think we were hiding Katie? Was she seeing less than savory people in secret? I guess we'll never know. I try not to let it bother me, but I wish I knew if my life were in danger that night. I have the feeling it may have been. After all, they weren't wearing face coverings, So if they wanted to commit a crime, they may want to get rid of the witnesses. But despite of how much I knew, random strange men who insisted to let me in, please, let's not meet.
I live in Arizona. I have most of my life, and I'm a rather large dude. Actually, this trait of mine being large and Latin has served me a lot of good in school, since all the school bullies and gangs never really bothered me. Well, I was large, Latin, and had a very straight face. I was the kind of kid that when I came into class for the first time, the teachers would take a step back because how I would kind of freak them out with my dress, size, and attitude. Funny because if they knew me personally, they would know I was such a pushover. But the facade was nice to have for the most part. Anyways, that is generalities about me, and here's why it's important for the dream. Remember when the strings of murders were happening in Phoenix and Mesa, Arizona? Many years ago, when some guys were driving around and shooting random pedestrians in the middle of the night. And the baseline killer. Yeah, one of those murders happened right next to the house I was in at the time. Well, not directly in front of the house, but a couple houses down on the T intersection. And I was not even a mile from the baseline either. As you might imagine, our parents were visibly shaken by this, and didn't let us go outside for a while after that happened. You can find these cases online if you don't believe it. Yes, this actually happened. Anyways, that's enough about that. Time for the dream. So I usually like to sleep in the living room because I personally find the couch more comfy than the bed, and I would alternate from the lazy boy couch to the sweetheart couch and just the family couch and so on. This particular night, I slept on the lazy boy couch for whatever reason. In my dream, I was in the body of a very frail, very small 9-year-old little girl. And not to weird people out too much, but this in itself made me scared in the dream because, well, with the mind of a grown man and the body of such a vulnerable little girl, you know you're a shiny target for predators out there, and you know exactly why as well. So I was walking around at about 2 a.m. on the neighborhood street. All the lights were out, and a heavy fog blanketed the neighborhood thick enough to even drain out the moonshine, including streetlights. But I knew in my mind that it was not a natural fog. This fog was somehow symbolic. It was not just a heavy fog coming in by nature. It was somehow fear. It was fear that blanketed the streets to a killer that was loose, and it made everyone so terrified that even the automated street lamps would turn off not to be seen by the killer. But everything was just dead. No humming from cars on the freeway. No helicopters. Absolutely nothing. Because of a rumor that went around about a killer being on the loose. Basically, the rumor in the dream was that the killer was looking for anyone to be running around in the streets outside of their homes. He would run up to them and assassinate them from behind. All that anyone knew about him was that he was always by himself. So if you were caught outside of your home alone at night, you were done for. Don't bother knocking on anyone's door. No one would answer in the fear that it was the killer. So they would just pretend that no one was home, because he was known for silently checking locks as well. That said, I was caught outside, and due to everyone's paranoia, they would not let me in, a small, defenseless child. As I was scurrying about, trying to run from driveway to driveway, using mailboxes, bushes, cars, anything to cover my small body, I kept my mouth shut at every turn. I had to hide, somehow. I stumbled across a 2-storied house. It was kind of weird because the first floor of the house was not even developed all the way, like it was still under construction, with all the wooden frames still visible. But the top floor was perfectly finished, beautiful, and quite frankly expensive looking. Almost like one of those kinds of houses you would find in a movie where the rich bad guy's house was on the cliffside or something. Anyways, I decided to check out the first floor of the house because I assumed that nobody would answer the second floor's door. But there in the ground was a horrific sight. My mouth was sealed shut, but my eyes widened so large that I could say that my eyes screamed at what I saw. The sight of all my family, hung and dead. I'm not going into detail about what I saw, but just know that how they died was nothing short of despicable, vulgar, and lewd. Terrifying and painful to see. I could just tell by the looks of their bruised bodies that they did not die slowly. I covered myself in fear of the same thing happening to me, and I walked backwards to the wall realizing I had walked into the scene of the killer's area, and these were all his fresh doings. I was doomed. At that moment, my eyes made out a figure that was standing in the corner of the room, dark and in black, and he had a weapon. I could hear metal tapping and clicking, and I froze out of fear. I couldn't move. Dread filled my entire body. I could not plow this guy over like I could normally do. I had lost all my strength. My legs were so small, I could not outrun him. My arms so small, I couldn't pin him to the wall using leverage. And though my efforts were in vain, I crossed my arms and legs, then crunched into the corner and braced for impact. But then something happened. Literally just like in the movies, someone saved me at my moment of vulnerability. A shot whistled through the air and struck the man, and he fell dead right onto my lap. The weight of his head and upper body pulled my leg down to the ground. Despite me trying to stay crunched up, the man bled all over my stiff jeans. Another man stood with a gun in his hand, coming down from the floor above this one, the nice one. And take my word for this one, what this guy said to me at this moment made me tremble in fear.
This will happen to you and your family if you don't wake up right now.
At that moment, my eyes flew open. I don't know how to describe it, but though I had just woken up, my mind was clear as if I'd been awake all day. My vision was perfectly adjusted to the dark living room of where I had collapsed earlier. My honest guess is that the adrenaline pulsing through me forced me into overdrive or something, because at that moment, I looked at the back door that had the glass panels to see the whole backyard, and I saw someone. Someone was trying to break into my house. I could see the same tools and weapons that I'd seen in the dream. He was dressed in black and had a similar build as a man in the dream. And no, screw that, I am not letting this happen. My mind reviewed what I had just seen in the dream. Someone's not going to do my family in like that. Rage filled me, and I pulled myself from the lazy boy and screamed, not out of fear, but vicious anger, revenge, and domination. The sound of, "If you open that door, I don't care what the law says. I will end you here and now." It was one of those moments where crosshairs were branded into my eyes to the target, and nothing stood in my way. And for a moment, the person trying to break in through the back threw a look at me. For a split second, he was ready to challenge me, but then I assumed he saw how big I actually was. His domineering stance shriveled, and he booked it. Looking back at it now, this was not the best move, but understand, when these rushing events happen, there is no time to plan, just to act. Needless to say, the would-be intruder ran off and jumped the fence. I chased after him until the fence, but didn't bother to jump it since I was large enough to topple it. And also because at this point, my family had woken up to my churning yell. The man was gone like the wind. I had a mental list of all the things I was about to do to the guy, but luckily for him, he got away. I won't lie, I don't actually remember a ton of what happened after that, but I do remember thoroughly freaking out my family with my bloody scream. I decided to lie to them and tell them that it was just a bad dream that I had. Why? Because aside from the stranger tickling the locks at the door, nothing happened. The guy ran off. He left no real trail to look into him with. And well, what was I going to tell the cops? I had a dream that this guy did this to my family, and thus, you should prosecute him for it. No, I don't want to hit the ignore these callers list of the cops, because when something more threatening happens, I need that assurance that I will get help. Not when the guy runs off before actually doing anything. Also, I do not want to share what I had witnessed either, with anyone. That needs to die with me. I didn't want to scare my family with what I had seen in my dream, but I was not about to take any chances. I walked out to the living room several nights again after that, walking in my sleeping bag. My family made fun of me for it, and I let them do it. I smiled a fake tired and smirky smile when I walked by them. But when my head was turned to them, my smile turned into a glare at the glass door. I walked in a sleeping bag, not because I wanted to be cute or hide my face from my family when I saw the glass door again, but because I used to hide a 48-inch machete inside the sleeping bag. Later, after planning things a little better, it evolved into a Desert Eagle with me as well. I always kept it unloaded, but I had the ammunition in my pocket just in case I needed to move my arms invisibly to load it for whatever reason late at night. I kept all the doors locked at night, just in case they were ever unlocked until daybreak. I slept like trash for a while after this happened, since my eyes were more than glued to that sliding door. But every day looking back at it, I never regretted it. I would rather lose a few nights of sleep over an incident that happened in the past, just to make sure that my dream stayed where it belongs. In the land of fiction, where it only bothers me in the past. I highly doubt the guy was either one of those killers that I mentioned before at the start. But the fact that there was a known menace in the area did not ease my mind for a long time after that. As far as I was concerned, it never happened, and I'm not about to make my family more paranoid about idiots screwing around in our city. But I'll be forever thankful for the man that warned me to wake up in my dream when he did. But I do remember that sound of tapping metal when I saw the guy. What I thought was a dream was actually happening in real life at the moment.
I work the night shift to plant, from 11 at night to 8 in the morning. One morning a few months back I came home, and when I pulled into the drive I noticed my storm door was open, so I knew someone came by. Then my dog came strolling around the corner wanting to be inside, so I knew someone not only came by, they got in. Upon going into the house I noticed some strange stuff. The first thing I noticed was my TV. See, I always leave a movie on repeat for my dog at night so that he has some light and noise. Well, someone had changed the movie. It was on the title screen. The movie was Predators, the remake one with Adrian Brody and Eric from the 70s show. I then noticed a garbage bag full of random clothing on my couch. It had a pair of pants, socks, and a couple of shirts, and a pair of work boots and shoes. The boots were size 13, so dude was fairly big, I guessed. Inside the pants were fishing lures and a box of condoms. As I investigated more, I noticed that all of my Hot Pockets and frozen pizzas and basically all my snack foods were eaten. Then I noticed a chair in the middle of the kitchen, with short brown hairs all around it, and my clippers plugged into the kitchen counter, and my set of keys were gone. So all in all, someone broke into my house, let my dog out, cut their hair with my clippers in my kitchen, watched a movie, ate all my food, left a bag of crap there, and I guess the joke's on them though, since I used those clippers to shave my man parts. Still weird though. Never found out who did that.
My grandparents lived in one of those villages, which had very few people living in it, along with my uncle, who would be away most of the time. There was no police station, no hospital, not even a regular bus to take you to town. After a big earthquake in the 80s, most houses were leveled to the ground, so people were forced to build back new homes with what they had. With that down, let's get to the house. It's sort of close to the center of the village, average looking, but there's a catch. It looks like there are two houses right next to each other. One of those is a one-room building left over from the old house, with a big window facing the street. The other is the new house. From the street, you can only see the house's walls, but not the yard. And from the yard, you don't see the street, but you can clearly hear if someone's there. My grandparents used the old building as a living room, and kept most of their important belongings there. My grandpa slept there at night. But during the day, they would spend their time in the yard or with neighbors, so no one would be in that room or near the house. One day, my grandpa got up early and opened the big window like any morning. He walked out to the yard and started doing his daily chores. Weed plants, feed the animals, and so on. Grandma was sick at the time, so she was in the new house sleeping, and Uncle was away as usual. It's important to mention that it was in the middle of the day and it was summer, so there was no covers on the windows, except a fly net. As my grandpa is fixing his plants, he hears someone walking loudly on the street, seemingly drunk. He doesn't really think anything of it, as it happens often. He turns his back to the house, right about to continue his work as he notices the racket stopped abruptly. He gets up to check if the person is okay, but starts walking to the room instead of the door. It all seems too quiet until he hears stuff falling inside the room. He runs inside and catches a very disheveled-looking young man, rummaging through their pantry and stuffing their documents and phones into his pockets. The guy had cut through the net with a pocket knife, which he took out to threaten my grandpa. While pointing and waving the knife around, he's shouting obscenities and telling my grandpa to give him all their money. While this is going on, Grandpa is trying to calmly reason with the guy, but he's not having it. He grabs my grandpa by the shoulder and puts a knife to his neck, telling him,
"If you tell anyone I've been here, call the police, scream or chase me, I'm coming back with friends, and I'll put an end to anybody I see in this house."
He throws Grandpa on the ground and jumps out the window running away. Grandpa is shaking, worrying about his sick wife and son. He told us later that he didn't care that the crook took their phones, money, and bank cards. But rather, he's scared that the guy will hold true to his word and hurt Grandma while she's out for her medication, and he wouldn't be able to help her. A little after that, Uncle comes back and gets enraged about the situation. He calls everyone he knows, including police officers at the nearby town, and they start looking for the guy. Turns out as he ran away, he threw the phones on the road and tried to withdraw money from the cards. That triggered the cards to get blocked, and he couldn't get anything out of it. They found him later getting drunk and angry with the other money he stole from my grandparents, and he was arrested for questioning. They didn't do anything though, just released him the next day with a warning. That's how they work here, sadly. Now, if that wasn't scary enough for my family, later on, the guy did come back with friends. But that's a story for another time.
Over a year ago, I got to bed with my boyfriend, and about a few minutes in, I hear my cat jump up the windowsill behind us and start hissing. He growled and meowed a lot, but never hissed, so I propped myself up and looked out the window expecting to see another cat. But instead I saw a man in a ski mask standing just to the left of the window, not looking in at me, and tapped my boyfriend and whispered there was a man outside. He sat up very slowly and looked out, then whipped the window open and yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" The man, who said he was just looking around, to which my boyfriend called BS and tried to jump out the window, but I had some poles set in, ironically, to discourage a break-in if I left my window cracked, so it was too narrow for him to escape from. My boyfriend sprinted out the front door instead to chase him, but whoever it was got away. He was so upset he escaped. We're not together anymore, but I miss that man every day.
This is less creepy, but it was crazy and it frightened me to my core. We live in a town in the high plains, and though it's a small town, it still has a couple thousand people in it. Our house is located near the center of town. It's one of the busier areas of the country. The door to our house consists of a screen door that doesn't lock and a large wooden door. If the wooden door isn't closed properly, my dog is able to shove open the screen door and chase her squirrel arch nemesis up the tree in the yard. I was home alone one day when I heard her shoot out the front door barking. I went outside to find her barking at the base of the tree that she typically traps squirrels in. However, this time when I look up at the branches, it's not a squirrel, but a bear staring back at me. I was shocked, but I knew I had to rescue my dog from the base of the tree, where she continued to bark and growl, with the bear only about 15 feet up away from her. I slowly crept forward and reached out for my dog's collar, trying not to frighten the bear out of its position. I was less than a foot away from the tree trunk and my dog's collar, when suddenly, the bear leapt down out of the tree, almost on top of me. The bear landed so close I could feel its fur brush against me. The bear took off running towards the backyard, with my dog in hot pursuit. Luckily, the bear was more afraid than aggressive, which gave me some sense of comfort. Not so lucky, we had just about completed our project of fencing in the backyard, and the bear was unable to find its way out to escape. I was terrified that once the bear became tired from running in circles around the yard, it would feel cornered and lash out at my dog with one of its heavy clawed paws. In hindsight, we must have looked like a British comedy, with me screaming and trying to catch the dog, who was barking and chasing a scared brown bear. After a long 5 minutes, I was able to corral my dog and herd the bear out of the fence opening. He gratefully scampered off down the road. Winded, I took a moment to reflect on the insanity that just ensued, only to find a line of trucks and neighbors watching me, and watching the bear as it ran away. It is still difficult for me to look back and believe this incident happened. Mostly, I am relieved that neither my dog nor myself suffered any injuries from this wild encounter.
A few years back, I moved into an apartment during the evening/night, and then got up the next morning to start unpacking. My roommate had said she was thinking about stopping by some point to drop off some stuff. So when I was in my room and hearing someone at the front door, I thought, oh, it must be Katie. It sounded like she was struggling, and I figured that she just had her hands full. I went to the door, and honestly have no idea why I didn't just open it, but something stopped me and I looked through the peephole. Some man was trying to break in. I froze my hand on the deadbolt until he gave up a few seconds later and just walked away.
My roommate and I had a somewhat similar experience a few months ago. We rented a house in a gated community type setting, just without the actual gate. You aren't allowed to solicit services of any kind in this community. That's largely because it's in a pretty not great area of town, and several robberies took place via jerks pretending to sell stuff. Anyway, I work second shift, so I sleep early in the morning before work. My roommate crept into my room one morning around 11 a.m. and whispered, "Don't answer the door. Someone's out there." So I went to check. A fairly large man was banging on my door and trying the knob rather aggressively before running to my neighbor's house and doing the same thing. Then coming back to our door, like he was trying to force his way inside, and he wasn't wearing a uniform. I yelled that there was no soliciting and to go away. Bad move on my part, because it enraged this man who went completely unhinged, standing in the road and screaming,
I just want to talk. Open up. Open up the door. I just want to talk.
He was running around and even trying harder to get into my house and the neighbors. That's when I noticed a gold-colored car parked in the middle of the road, blocking entrance of other vehicles coming or going. It was extremely out of place. The driver had on a hoodie pulled over his face and was slumped down at the seat. I took my roommate to her room, where we locked the doors and called the police. They were quick to send out officers our way. The entire time we waited for them, the angry man kept kicking at doors, going around to windows and trying doorknobs of our house and our neighbors, while screaming that he just wanted to talk. As soon as the squad cars came, the angry man jumped into the gold car. The officers spoke for a while out of earshot. Then one of them followed the gold car out of the housing area. The other officers told us that the men claimed to be with an energy company. They were able to produce a business card and were issued some kind of warning about not coming back. We were told to call immediately if the men returned, and urged not to answer the door for anyone we didn't know. I don't know what those men were up to, but they were certainly not selling cost-efficient energy. The license plate on the car when it drove away was from New York. I don't live anywhere near New York.
This happened in 2016, when I was a 17-year-old, first-year college student in film school. My name's Julia, and I'm currently 22. I lived alone in my first ever apartment. It was really small, but I was really proud of my independence. I never felt unsafe in the apartment for several reasons. There were multiple gates in the residence that needed to be opened through a code that only people who lived there knew. My door had 3 different locks, and it was right next to the university, so most people who lived in the neighborhood were college students. Nothing bad ever happened in the neighborhood before. I've always been very careful with locking the door whenever I leave my home. I also always check twice, as I have slight OCD. So this one time I leave to go to class and lock my door, but for some reason I couldn't get the key out of the lock. It was completely stuck, so I went to the caretaker of the building so that he could help me, but he wasn't there, and I was going to be late for class. So I went to class with the key still in the lock. I took off the keychain first so it wasn't too noticeable, and when I got home the caretaker was back, and he came to help me, and we couldn't get it out for 15 minutes until somehow we did. He told me the lock was damaged, but that I didn't necessarily need to change it if I only locked it once inside instead of twice. I said okay, and that was the end of it. I really wasn't worried because of how safe I felt in this building. Fast forward 2 months later, and I was walking out of the trash one night at 11 p.m, while on the phone with my sister. I remember telling her that I was taking out the trash. Then, I would always take a shower before heading to a party. As I previously said, I always locked the door, even just to take out the trash because of the lock being damaged, and it was only one. When I got back to my apartment, I found the door unlocked, which immediately alarmed me. So I went back into the apartment and locked the door immediately with 3 different kinds of locks. When you walk into my apartment, which is just 215 square feet, you have the main room in front of you and the bathroom door immediately to your left. I had left the bathroom door slightly open, even though I could see a man in the shower, turning his back to me. Naturally, when I saw this, I tried to open the door and leave as fast as possible, except my main locker was damaged from 2 months earlier, and I couldn't open it no matter how hard I tried. In this moment, all I could think of was the fact that I had to leave as quickly as I could. I jumped out the window without really thinking and figured it was the only solution, except I lived on the second floor, so I completely smashed my ankles in the landing. I started running in whichever direction I could when I got a little bit further from the building. I looked back and the man was there at my window watching me run away. I thought of two possible outcomes. Either the man was going to jump and chase me, except I wouldn't get far with my twisted ankles, or he would get scared of heights and be locked in my apartment. Thankfully, he picked option 2. I went to hide in a little bush further away and called the police, who arrived in just 10 minutes because I was living close to the station. They pushed my door open and the man was just there sitting on my couch holding a kitchen knife, waiting for me to come back. They arrested him and later told me he had already been arrested for sexual assault, rape, and attempted kidnapping and attempted murder. They also told me how everything had happened. Like it was a very friendly neighborhood with mostly college students, so we got inside the building by other people holding the door open. He then heard me telling my sister I was going to take a shower, which is why he was waiting in the bathroom for me. He picked my lock while I was taking out the trash and apparently noticed me on school campus and followed me home several times before succeeding in actually getting in. He stayed inside waiting for me because I'd only recently changed my phone and the previous one was still on the table, so he thought I didn't have the phone with me to call the police. I don't live there anymore, but after that, to get into the building we all need identification proving we live there. Building IDs were created and we need to scan them every time, and it was the only way to get inside. Nothing bad has ever happened in that building after that.
When I was about 17, I still lived with my parents in a 2-story house with a walkout basement. My dad has always slept on the ground floor on the living room couch because he snores so loudly, while my mom and I slept on the top floor in our rooms across the hall from each other. Now, my dad's snoring is something we're all used to, and a pause in the snoring thanks to some likely undiagnosed sleep apnea would cause my mom, myself, or both to wake up. Anytime I awoke at night, I'd immediately listen for him, and either go back to bed when I heard a reassuring snore, or throw a pillow at him so he'd wake up and breathe. My mom employed a similar strategy, going out into the hallway to listen for snoring, armed with a pillow if needed. One night, I awoke to someone standing in the hall outside my door. I believed it was my mom, like any other night, so I laid in bed pretending to sleep, while listening for my dad snoring. Still half asleep, I realized he had been snoring for several seconds as the figure in the hall crept into my room. Unalarmed, I figured it was either my mom checking in on me like she used to when I was younger, or a sleepwalking episode. My entire family suffers from sleep disturbances. My mom occasionally sleepwalks, my dad has sleep apnea, and I suffer from narcolepsy. With all of this, odd night events were relatively common for us. The figure spent some time in my room, then eventually left, leaving me to drift back into slumber. The next morning, my mom, who seemed concerned, asked me why I stood at the foot of her bed last night for such a long time. Puzzled, I explained my experience the prior night as well. We uncomfortably laughed it off as sleepwalking or a strange dream. A few weeks later, my mom opened her bedroom window, which is on the second story, and is the only window on that side of the house. The window is located just above her cluttered craft table, and by cluttered, I mean the top of the desk is barely visible beneath all the supplies and partially completed crafts. Oddly, the window was unlocked, and the screen for the window was completely missing. Assuming my dad had removed the screen, she asked him where it was, so she could replace it. He denied ever removing the screen, and went to investigate what had happened, as screen windows don't typically just fall off. When he stuck his head out the window to investigate, it became clear someone had entered the house from the outside, using something that had scraped all the paint from around the window. Terrifyingly, the intruder had managed to enter the house without disturbing anything off the desk, waking up the dogs, or setting off the sensor light. They also didn't break into the house to steal any physical possessions. We were all shaken when we put everything together.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Shivers, for joining me in tonight's video. Huge thanks as always to my members and patrons, who really do help keep the channel going. And it's just great to have you back, bro. Thank you so much for joining me on this. If you liked Shiver's voice, please check out his channel. He's just coming back to the game, and I'm sure he could use all the love and support you guys have to offer. So thank you guys. I'm going to just leave it here. I'm leaving a link to his channel and a video of his in the description and on screen now. So feel free to check them out. But for now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.